Okay, good morning. We're still gathering here in Albuquerque for the E&M's Integrated Resource Planning meeting. We've just started the webinar, so hopefully the folks that are out there online can hear me. So we're just checking that out. Just kind of the process of what we're trying to do right now is, we found in the last kickoff meeting it can take some time to get into that building down here, so we thought we'd allow some time for people to gather, get some refreshments, and network while you're here. So we will get started in 5 to 10 minutes. Thanks. Yep. What I'm planning is last year, 3 years ago. Okay. That's the hope. I mean, from this side of the bar.
Hey there. I'm good. Howard.
I just shared that on this Good. Yes, we did. Right.
Just one. I think it's pretty easy. Right here. Let's share Lily's. This is where you send it to either everybody or just one person.
Anyway, never mind.
I guess I'm just getting unless somebody asks a question, then I can respond.
Hello. How are you? Did you guys end up posting a lot?
Really?
The email that you parked there.
That's what I'm making feel like better.
Really? Let's feel the rain.
I think they're doing the work. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine.
Did you hear that? Parking lot control was working roped off.
Oh, no. Say why? You fixing something?
Yeah, that's right. They're not going down. They're not going to take. Well, the rate is. Oh, God. The rate. Give Good morning again. We'll get started pretty soon here. I just want to make sure if you're here, you've had a chance to pick up the handouts. We also have refreshments in the back. We'll be taking a break as we go along, so this isn't your last chance of those. We'll get started in about 5 minutes.
I haven't. I just couldn't find it in the help.
That was something they showed at the feature.
Went through the user's guide. Ended up printing the whole thing out. Just didn't have the.
If you have a list of who's online, give it to at ours.
I couldn't find it.
Hey, how are you?
Everything in order, so it's ready to go. Sir, you've got your suit on. It's just a handful on. Yeah.
As far as I can tell, none of them have responded to my "Can you hear or see?"
Okay, so they have time to be silent.
Yeah, a couple of them are inactive. All three of them are now in attendance. They haven't touched a key.
Oh, okay. Good morning. This is Pat O'Connell. This is give you the airline warning. This is P&M's Integrated Resource Plan meeting. So if you came for something else and don't want to be here for 4 hours, now's the time. Just a little bit of organizational stuff before we get started. You just came in the room. We have some handouts at the front, and we have some refreshments at the back. If you're new to IRP, one of the things we like to do in these meetings is use the name tent so you can signal that you've got a question. So if you haven't signed in and don't have one of these, you might have not a full experience at this meeting. So we just have a few more people filtering in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, the agenda for today's meeting, just kind of an overview of what we're doing with IRP this time through is, in the past, we've gone through IRP as we worked through analysis and got results. We would take the IRP process a step at a time, have a meeting about once a month to talk about each step, and that was a good process, but one of the results of it is by the time we got to, say, February or March, that's where we've gotten through all the steps, and that's where the public advisory group could finally see the whole picture. And so what we're trying to do this time around is show the whole picture by illustrating all the steps. We're going to be doing that over the course of today, next Friday, and then do a discussion wrap-up on next week on the 26th. So that's the overall process we're going to take with IRP this time, is just try to illustrate what the analysis looks like and how we start forming conclusions and results over the next couple days, today and Friday primarily. On the next meeting, we will collect whatever feedback we've received over those 2 days, address it to the degree we can, and then spend most of the time on Thursday talking about what are we going to do from here, because we're going to present some pretty, I think, meaty stuff over today and Friday, but we're not by any means done with IRP. So that's the goal over the next 3 days. So the agenda for today, first of all, is public advisory process. So the real agenda is to have a good discussion. What I'll be talking about, the organization of my talk here, is we'll start off with what we're doing now, welcome, introduce, and I'll give you some safety tips about living in this building. And we'll just talk about ground rules and the goals of the IRP. So after we get kind of those background administrative things pulled together, we'll start talking through the process. I'll describe the steps that we follow, and then I'll try to illustrate those steps along the way by showing where we're at right now with our analysis. And then finally, we'll wrap up the meeting here with just a collection of questions that will help us with what we're going to do on Friday. And again, just the goal here is an open conversation about what we're doing in IRP and to share enough information that we can have a rich discussion around the IRP process. By way of introduction, if you don't know me, and pretty much everybody in this room looks at least a little familiar, my name is Pat O'Connell. I'm P&M's Director of Planning and Resources. Also within the room, I'm going to be the one doing the talking today. That's not going to be the case forever. Like Friday, we'll get some folks up here with expertise on their subject. Some of them are here at the moment. Actually, I'd seen Steve earlier, but he must have stepped out. Well, oh, there's Steve. But the energy efficiency resource. Dean will do some discussion on one of the risk analysis pieces of our process. So anyway, today it'll be a lot of me, but that's just not going to be the case as we go along. So the room, we've got a good balance of people that are interested in the IRP process. I can see quite a few folks who've been here before, so that's good also. And then we also have a number of P&M employees. So I encourage you when we take breaks to mingle and meet each other. This is the kickoff of this type of meeting for what we'll be doing over the next couple of months. Okay, the safety and logistics points for that we should get out of the way here is, first of all, I don't know if we've ever had an IRP without a fire drill. I don't know that there will be one today, but odds are good it could happen. So we're in a new room, new building for P&M. So what will happen if the alarm goes off, we do have to leave, first point. And then second point, when we do leave, what we'll do is go through the exit doors and then, span out to the left and right. There are stairwells near the men's and women's rooms. We'll go down the stairwells a couple floors, end up in a parking garage, go out the parking garage to the street, take a right to get to the corner, and then keep going west until we get to the parking lot where, as I've been informed, we'd advertised maybe you could park this morning, but I guess that was blocked off, so I apologize for that. That's a fire drill. Restrooms, again, that there's the women's room. If you walk through the exit doors, it'll be to your right, and then when you get past the elevator, to your left. Men's room, walk through the exit doors and take a left. You go down the hall, it'll be on your right. And then, building security, you've all experienced this already. It was part of the reason why we asked people to be here at 8 and we're starting at 8:30, is we've learned that the security process can take some time. We'll be continuing to meet in this building, in this room, so now that you've seen that once, hopefully that will be familiar next time. Okay, the ground rules for IRP meeting, again, I'm seeing quite a few familiar faces here, so we're not doing anything new here. Obviously, public advisory process questions and comments are not only welcome, it's what we're trying to listed here at the meeting. I've got a pretty meaty slide deck, and we've got until noon to do it. So we will be encouraging discussion, having lots of questions. It looks like we're starting to run out of time, though. We need to just be mindful of the fact that time is limited this morning. Again, this is something that I think has developed really well over the last two IRPs. We hope to keep it going in this one. The comments should be respectful of all the participants. Just a simple tip of how to make that work is, let's talk about the subject matter and not the personalities. And then another time-honored tradition in IRP is we have these name tents. So I've got quite a few spots in my presentation where I'm just going to stop and ask for questions. If you've got a question that comes up before I get to one of those, go ahead and stick your tent up like that, and I will either get to you when I get to the stopping point, or I will stop at that point and see what your question is, so we can have a good discussion that way. And that way you also don't have to have your hand in the air for a while. And then just a reminder, today's presentation is not P&M's plan or a financial forecast. It is an illustration of the IRP modeling process. So that's just a bit of financial business I need to address. And the next slide, if you choose to read it, is the longer version of what I just said. Do I need to do any more on that? Yeah. Okay, so what are the goals of the IRP? I've got one slide that I'm going to work through now where we're talking about just what IRP hopefully will result in. I know it will result in a resource plan that looks out over a 20-year planning horizon. I know that by the IRP rule, we're going to do this again in 3 years. So one of the things that I think the key takeaway when you're thinking about the process and watching what we're doing is the key takeaway, I believe, in an IRP is what we'll put down in our report as the 4-year action plan. So what the 4-year action plan will be is after we've looked out 20 years, what are the things we need to start doing now to orient the portfolio in the direction that we've seen or are recommending through this process. So 4-year action plan is as important as any other piece of what we're going to be doing in IRP over these next few months. And then, P&M, my group, we're planning all the time. The process I'm illustrating now is a task that we perform on a number of topics throughout the year, every year. But what happens in IRP is we open that process up. We make it transparent to everyone who's interested. The people that are collected in the room here will be loading a lot of this information on the web so that you can look at it in your free time, don't have to just come to these meetings. So the goal of the public advisory process is, after I've shown you how we do all this planning, is to collect your comments with the thought that we can make the planning process better through that process. So just by experience, the kind of comments that are really useful in the IRP context, one is just, this doesn't make sense to me. I mean, you're all here because you're interested in what we're doing. You're electric customers, so you have some familiarity with the service. So as we're going through and we're doing something that just doesn't make sense, there's two possibilities there. One, I'm not explaining it well enough. So the fact you've alerted me it doesn't make sense will cause me to step back and think about how can I explain this, present it better. The other is maybe it doesn't make sense because it doesn't make sense. So we'll look at the comment and step back and work through our analysis there. And then the other is, I see a lot of folks looking through the handouts. We're trying to share the kind of data that we use when we put it into the analysis process. We work really hard to stay abreast of what things cost, what they can do. That's mostly what this data captures. But despite the fact that we work hard on that, we're not saying we know everything about everything. So there might be some subject matter experts here that are aware of something that we haven't captured in our data. If you give us a comment along those lines, we'll try to verify it. Because at the end of the day, somebody at P&M like myself is going to have to go and stand up and support that data. So that's the process we'll go through if you provide us comments along those lines. And then finally, at the end of the process, we'll create a report. It'll get filed with the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission. So these reports also end up, just as a result of the process, being not just important because they document why we're doing what we're doing, but they also tend to be good reference documents. So that's something people like to have handy. Then just a few more background items I put on the slide for reference items. This is a process that, like I say, we do planning all the time, but there are some, P&M is a regulated utility. The service we provide is a regulated service. So there is some legislation and some rules that help guide us through the process. I'm not going to spend a lot of time describing those this morning. But then this next slide really gets to, so I told you what the process is, talked about there's lots of rules and regulations that we're trying to follow, but our guiding principle in the IRP is to try to strike a balance. Because you'll see as we illustrate the process that there can be trade-offs. Things that might make the system more reliable might also result in a cost on the customer's bill. And then when we're talking about risks, many of those are associated with the future environmental regulations. So we have to try to balance what we know versus what we expect to happen versus what might happen. So that's a lot of what happens in this IRP process. It is showing how different items either work with each other or work against each other. And then a truly good plan is one that we believe is balanced along all three of those items. Okay, so at this point, this is one of my stop and ask question points. Again, I tried to describe what we're going to do over the next today and over the next couple of days, and so at this point, just wanted to stop and see if anybody had any questions before we get into the really more technical stuff. I'm going to get a drink of water.
I've got one very general question, and that is, in the process, how much are you looking at what's going on in the WECC? I know that A&M is going to be closing a couple of the units at San Juan, and I understand some units at Four Corners are going to be closed down. How much are you taking a look at what's going on in power supply throughout the Western Coordinating Council?
That's a great question. Now, I'll repeat the question to hopefully so the folks on the webinar can hear it. And you know what the question was is how much does RIRP look at what else is going on in the WECC, it's the Western Electric Connection, it's the Western grid that we are tied to. The first primary responsibility of P&M's IRP is to produce a reliable system for P&M's customers. So our system is interconnected to WECC. What we're looking at is being reliable within what's called our balancing area, which is mostly the western two-thirds of the state of New Mexico. So that's what we will be analyzing, is we'll be looking at reliability in terms of us keeping our own system reliable. There is a benefit to being connected to the grid that we can buy power from neighbors to enhance our reliability. There are other things going on in WECC that we will get to. For example, there are some transmission lines that are being proposed. We'll look at those in terms of, does that make sense that we should connect to these transmission lines to improve our reliability, or is there something about that that could reduce the existing cost? So the primary focus is on P&M's balancing area and P&M's New Mexico PRC customers. So we're mindful that things are going on in the WECC, but we're planning for P&M in New Mexico.
Yes, one of the questions I have has to do with your assumptions in your model. The last IRP, most of the decisions that you put forward were based on cost models. Those cost models were hard costs that were estimated costs of hardware bringing to the plant. But there were some additional costs that were related to what I call soft costs, cost of CO2. Could you explain some of those?
Yeah, the question was about the type of costs that go into the analysis models, with compare and contrast being, what was called hard costs, and that referring to machinery or plant that you know what it costs because other people are building it right now, compared to what was referred to as soft costs, which is impact of future regulations. So the answer is we'll be looking at both of those. First of all, it's the prudent thing to do from a planning perspective. And my goal in the IRP is when we're looking at all of those things, show the relative weight of them, one compared to another. I'll actually be discussing, we call them sensitivities. When I get into the illustration of the process, we'll talk about some sensitivities to hard and soft costs in the model, and at least talk through how that affects our plan. So great question, thank you. Okay, at this point, and if you were at the kickoff meeting, I introduced myself as an engineer, that's true. We're going to start talking about some of the more technical parts of what goes on in IRP. If I fall into jargon or I blast past something, please, stick your name tent up, and I won't be offended. I'll try to slow down, back up, and explain what we're doing. So this slide summarizes the steps that we follow when we're going through our IRP process. It shows it in a kind of a linear fashion, left to right. Reality is that we're iterating along all these steps pretty much constantly throughout the process, but they're laid out in this order because each time you iterate, you kind of have to go back to one of these steps to continue to work forward. So first step, collect assumptions. That's what we've been doing. We spent a lot of time over the last couple of months refreshing the data that we need to plug into IRP. So some of the key aspects of that data is what is our existing system, what resources are we using right now, what will they cost to operate in the future. And we also try to look across the range of known technologies and focus on the ones that are roughly the right size for our balancing area. So we go through lots of databases, lots of data. We take these known technologies, we try to make sure that we've estimated the cost properly for conditions in New Mexico, which tend, our sites tend to be higher in elevation, arid environment, that type of thing. So that's, after we take the database info that's true at sea level, we take that information and scale it to our situation. And then beyond data, there are things that are going to be very important in the modeling of the future. And because they're in the future, we aren't certain exactly what the values of those are going to be. So we're calling them projections. Again, based on experience, the three projections that really have the most weight in the results of the modeling are what's our demand going to be, what our price is going to be, primarily the price of natural gas. And then we try to, at a minimum, we include a potential impact of reasonably anticipated regulations. So the one that I'll spend some time talking about today, and I expect we'll be talking about through the process, is regulation of greenhouse gas emissions. How that shows up in the P&M IRP modeling process is CO2. The process is moving where it will result in some regulation on not just new units, but on existing units. So what we're doing is trying to account for that somehow in our process. So then we've got this bag of things that more or less, I guess they were described as hard and soft items. And we know that when we combine those things, that if we just combine them along one idea, that we might be missing something important. So rather than try to decide exactly what the future is going to look like, we put together our plan to try to understand the risks. So we've got two basic tools for that plan. We call them scenarios, and we call them sensitivities. A scenario would be a assumption or a set of linked assumptions about what the future might look like. So you can have a scenario where you say, well, demand is going to be roughly what it is today with some growth. Gas prices will be similar to what they are today. Carbon legislation, based on where we're at right now, we expect it to start having an impact, say, in 2020, and then from 2020, we expect that impact to grow. So that's a collection of data and assumptions that we call a scenario. Then we'll take that scenario and create other ones that are different. And that's really the goal. It's not to predict exactly what the future is going to be, but put scenarios together that, first of all, can make sense, but second of all, are different enough that when we look at the results across that range of different scenarios, we can look for items that show up in all cases. And that's shows up in all cases, then we feel like that's a really good element for the plan. Then other interesting things to look for across scenarios are things that maybe don't show up in one scenario, but they're really strong and important in another one. So those are the type of things where we want to start considering, is there an implication there for our strategy, for our future? So we'll highlight those, talk about them, and based on our evaluation of those items, they'll become part of our portfolio, or they'll be addressed somehow in the 4-year action plan. Then the sensitivity is more of a drill down on a particular assumption. One of the classic sensitivities is how much is it going to cost me to build something. So that's one of the things I'm going to illustrate or talk about a little bit this morning is, on our solar plants, we've bought solar 3 times now over the last 4 years. Each time we bought it, the price came down. Then in our most recent solar purchase, we were hearing conflicting things. The prices came down because Chinese were dumping panels, or who knows. So what we don't know is, will the price continue to go down? Have we hit a bottom, or is it going to go back up? So that's one thing that we look at in IRP is I'm getting a result based on my modeling, based on one assumption for that item. So because I really don't know what the price for that item is, I'm going to test what I'm seeing over a range for that item. So that's the definition of a sensitivity. So after we've collected our data, our projections, and we've got our plan around scenarios and sensitivities, then we get into the heavy-duty analysis. That happens using a lot of computing time, a lot of hard computing work. And our goal with that analysis is first, just let the model tell us what potential solutions are out there. And we take that set of answers and try to identify the best solutions. And in this range of criteria concept, we're looking at best solutions across multiple scenarios. And then finally, we're going to test the solutions under a range of assumptions. So that's kind of a quantitative test, where again, we circle back and say, hey, there's some things in here that are important. I don't know exactly what the value is, so I'm going to test what I think is the best solution under a range of potential values for what's driving that solution. So the analyze bucket is kind of the quantitative step. The next step is the qualitative step, and that's where we get the benefit of not only me and my staff having a lot of experience working with these issues, we also get the benefit of you being here. So when we're evaluating, we're taking a step back and not just blindly looking at what the computer tells us to do. We're saying, does that make sense? So the kind of questions that we try to ask when we're doing that analysis is think about what works best under most conditions, getting back to scenario and sensitivity analysis. And then when we identify a risk, are there tools out there that make that risk easy to mitigate? I'll use as an example of that natural gas. We're all familiar that natural gas prices change, but there are also financial tools and physical tools out there that can help you mitigate the risk of not just what my natural gas is going to cost, but is it going to be there when I need it? So that's the type of thing that you think about when you're doing an analysis. And then you put your answers to all those questions together, and that's what helps us define most cost-effective portfolio. That's a term that you'll hear me using a lot. I use it in this context because it's a defined term in the IRP rule. One of the things we find is when we're looking at a 20-year planning horizon, you're dealing with big numbers, billions of dollars. The difference between these billions of dollars solutions might feel like it's a small difference. So what we're trying to decide is what would be the most cost effective in terms of at or the least apparent cost and the least apparent risky. And then again, just to reiterate, the real important and valuable thing that comes out of this exercise is a 4-year action plan. So that's what we'll be developing over the next few months here in the IRP process. And then the last step, report, that's not something that we're going to address really today, other than the fact that we're recording this meeting. We've handed out a lot of information. So as this next few months go on, we're collecting all of that information. We're building towards a report. So eventually we'll have this document for this year, and we will file it with the PRC by June 30th of next year. Okay, so at this point I just laid out a lot of stuff. I need a drink of water, and so I'm going to stop and answer questions.
I do have a comment. If you wouldn't mind, I appreciate it if you make these slides just a teeny bit larger.
Where they have glasses.
Sure.
Yeah, the comment was a request to make the slides larger. That's noted. Yeah, there are some risk mitigation techniques for that. You can bring your reading glasses or sit up front like Dave has here. So. Yes, Cliff.
When you say you purchased solar, does that mean that you built it or someone else built it and you purchased it from them?
The 3 cases I was talking about, we put out an RFP. Okay, I'll repeat the question. Sorry. Thanks, Steve, for reminding me. The question was what I meant when I said we purchased solar. Over the past 4 years, we have we did a process where we did a request for proposals. People bid into us what it would cost for them to build solar and then sell it to E&M. So that's how that has happened the last 3 times. One, the first group of solar plants are online and in production. The second group is under construction right now. They'll be online by the end of the year. The third group I'm talking about, we just proposed in July. So it's part of our renewable plan finance.
Is that like for a 20-year contract or?
Well, that's the thing. When we buy it, then we own it. So we will maintain and operate it for as long as it's useful and cost effective. So there's no real term limit on that. Okay, the next couple slides, I'm going to walk through a lot of the data. If you remember that first slide, collect data, walk through the data. We've got, for the hard-to-read slides, we tried to improve that by blowing up the information on a handout. For this first slide, load and resource table, there's really 2 handouts that feed into that. The first one is this existing information PowerPoint, and then the other one is this load and resource table. So the load and resource table is a summary of the information that's in this existing resources handout, and then the summary is compared to what our peak demand projection is for the mid case in IRP, and then we take the combination of the demand we need to meet versus what we believe the resources can produce, and that produces the summary at the bottom called reserve margin. That's one of just a common metric that's used in the electric industry for you to know that I have sufficient resources available to meet variations in demand or the fact that the output on the resources might fluctuate. So my intention isn't to spend a lot of time talking about this existing data in this meeting. I think it's more valuable use of our time if we could talk about the relationships and how things work together. If you went to the kickoff meetings, I had promised to supply this info before the meeting. I didn't get that done, so I apologize. But you have it now, and you have it with the concept of what is it and how do we intend to use it. So what I encourage you to do is take this information, look at it. We are going to meet again on Friday. We'll meet again on the following Thursday. And we do have an email route open. So when you look through the existing data section, when you find stuff like typos or things that you don't understand, please feel free to ask the questions on that.
Go ahead. Ask the question.
Yeah, we got a question right now.
Yes, these are forecast projections. But you know, 2012, 2011, 2010, you have forecast projections. How did you do? What's the historical accuracy of the projection?
The question is, how does our system peak demand projection, how has that performed in the recent past? That is an element of, well, first of all, I don't have the data to tell you right now what that is. Second of all, Friday we are going to be talking about demand, so we can include that in the presentation we do Friday. And then finally, that is also an element of something that will go into the IRP final report. So just the one interesting thing I do have at my fingertips for the peak demand is that this summer we did hit a new all-time peak demand on our system in June. Okay, next slide, yet another dense piece of information I don't expect you to be able to read on the slide. So good news, it's a handout. What this slide is a summary of our known technologies. So I'll stop now, I got a question here.
Yeah, sorry, on the previous slide,
Sorry, I missed you.
I'm a little bit confused here. I'm looking at the total renewable resources in megawatts is 63 megawatts in 2022. All right. In 2022, this chart says that the total renewable resources in megawatts is 3. The total peak demand is 2025. So that is generation capability, not actual kilowatt hours produced. But I noticed that it's only 3.1%. The renewables generation capability is only 3.1%. How does that fit in with the renewable portfolio standards? That would be up around 20%.
Okay, I have a question based on the load and resources table. It was a comparison of the total renewable resources, which are shown on line 25 of the table, looking at the column in 2022. And if we compare the 63 that's shown for total renewable resources versus net system peak demand, the question is that you come up with a 3%. So the question is, how does that relate to our renewable portfolio standard? Is that fair? Okay, the answer, first of all, renewable portfolio standard is measured on energy. So it's a percent of sales. So there isn't, you can have some renewable resources, for example, the geothermal, that operates more or less 24/7 year-round. So the ratio of energy to what it's providing on peak is a higher number. With the solar resources, and particularly the wind, that's probably the best example. Wind typically isn't blowing during our peak demand, so this table shows what we count for contribution from wind during the peak hour, which you'll see in the notes below at the bottom that that's 5% for wind. So on wind, we've got the 200 megawatt New Mexico Wind Energy Center, and we have included on this sheet our proposed Red Mesa Wind Farm, which is another 100 megawatts. So the total capacity for wind is over 300 megawatts, but what wind is projected to supply us over the peak hour is 10 megawatts. So that's something that distorts that relationship on this sheet. And then again, renewable portfolio standards, the targets are based on how much energy you get from each resource, not the capacity.
So will there be a similar table that will show us what the comparison is between actual kilowatt hours using or sold?
The question is there a table that shows the actual, the kilowatt hour production for each one. So what I'm doing is looking through the existing system documentation resource to see if we've already provided that. Yeah, for example, slide 9 of this existing system information document shows the historic kilowatt hour production from New Mexico Wind Energy Center. So we do have some of that information in here. We can go back and check and make sure we've got it for all of the resources that are on this table. Yes, Dave.
Just on that point, Pat, will presumably the least cost portfolios that come out of this process will provide the energy forecasts based on those input assumptions, right?
Correct.
When will that information be available through this process in terms of, again, an energy forecast? This is a demand sort of projection, but the energy outlook based on a given set of, for a given scenario or whatnot.
Okay, the question is, how will this concept you're just talking about, the mix of capacity and energy, how will that information play out through the process? So first thing I'm doing is looking at my data for new alternatives first draft sheet, and what I'm not seeing immediately on here is a number called capacity factor. That would be a way to translate those. So anyway, that's something we'll take a note of that we need to add for each of these resources for a given capacity, how much energy do we expect to get. And for renewables, they're not dispatchable. So for those resources, we'll take whatever they produce. Whenever the wind's blowing, whenever the sun's shining, we'll take that. So when I give you a capacity factor for those resources, that's pretty much a good map or guide to know what they're going to produce. For the gas resources that we have on these sheets, those are used to balance the system out, and whether we run it or not is a function of how much is it going to cost me to generate from that plant versus maybe buy power or some other way to manage the system. So when we start talking about capacity factors for gas plants, those are more just a typical thing. We can talk about when we get to portfolio modeling, when we get to the end of that, what the model's telling us is a capacity factor for those resources, but that will be much more of an estimate than what we'll be giving for the renewable resources. Dave, you had a question?
It's not really a question. The prior question about the difference between capacity and energy, it also, your plan here does not include any new resources beyond your current renewable energy plan.
Yeah, that's a good point. Dave was pointing out on my loaded resource table that what we have on this sheet is only things that are existing or things that are proposed. We have an increasing renewable portfolio standard, so at a minimum to meet that standard, we will propose more resources in the future that aren't on this sheet, but through this IRP process, that's one of the rules and regulations that help guide our planning. So we'll look for, to the extent we can see it, the best path to meet the renewable portfolio standard going forward. So you have a question in the back here?
A comment on this chart. Who's down at the bottom of information on the environment impact and then state that is still probably in drought conditions. What I'd like to see is water that could be included in the cost in the next dry state. That is
Yeah, the question is about water use for each resource. Again, I think you'll find that listed for the existing resources, and I'm not seeing it on the sheet we've done for future. So yes, that is something that we always look at in the planning is the total water use for the resources. So we will include that for all of our resources. Okay, not seeing any more questions, and we'll be able to go back to stuff as we move forward, so don't feel like you're using your only opportunity here. Okay, so I've talked about slides 10 and 11. Slide 12 is about an existing resource that isn't on our list of existing system information. It's a resource that we're including in our resource planning that we're doing right now, and it's Palo Verde Unit 3. One thing I'm learning as I go out and talk in the community is that some of our customers aren't aware that one of the key contributors in our existing resource portfolio is the nuclear plant, Palo Verde Nuclear Generating Station. It's west of Phoenix, Arizona. There's 3 units at that plant. The first 2 units, units 1 and 2, we're currently using to serve New Mexico customer demand. The 3rd unit, PNM owns it, but it's not currently being used to serve New Mexico customer demand. So in terms of what it can do, what it costs, what its output is, it's fairly identical to units 1 and 2. The unit, again, it's not a new nuclear plant. It's been online since 1988. It has a license to operate through 2047. And this is something that's been in the news. It's been in our financial statements since at least February. But we're looking at the possible inclusion of that as part of replacement portfolio for San Juan Generating Station. I have Dave, you
Give us the costs.
I'm going to talk about the cost, but yeah, the question was from Dave Van Winkle. We talked about the cost of that one, and it sounds like Dave Getz had the same question, so we will talk about that today. Okay, the next 2 slides are graphs just to summarize. I was talking earlier about projections. Prices are important projections that we do in IRP. In the past IRP, what we tried to do with prices is take a look at things like future curves and project prices going forward. One of the issues with that is, again, we're anticipating future carbon regulation because of the role of gas in setting the price for electricity. We believe that the future price of carbon owing to future regulations is going to be tied to natural gas. So coming up with a concept where we had those 2 things in a way that we felt like they were sufficiently related to each other was a task that is frankly beyond my team's capability. So what we did was we hired PACE. So there's a handout here. It's Siemens Global Market Link Scenarios prepared for PNM. We hired PACE to use, they have a fundamental model of electric and gas production dispatch nationwide. We talked through them with some scenarios that they use when they run that model. Came up with the scenario definitions that are in here. PACE ran the model, and the output of the model for gas are these curves right here. So this is an item that I'm planning to talk about on Friday. We'll go through what the different scenario definitions are. We'll have PACE on the phone so that we can do some question and answer on that. So I'm including it here because, first of all, doing an overview of the process, couldn't do that without talking about our gas prices. And second of all, just to introduce the concept, to explain to you what this handout is, and promise you that we'll spend more time talking about it on Friday. So the next slide shows the CO2 pricing comparison, and when you're comparing the descriptions in here, you'll see there's names that PACE came up with. There's reference, clean, and cheap. So when you look at reference, clean, and cheap on gas, and you look at reference, clean, and cheap on carbon, we've been running those two as a pair. Okay, so at this point,
and prior, his unit's been fairly flexible about renaming things when it feels like names of pejorative or inappropriate, something like that.
yeah, so we have a question from Tom Singer. He pointed out that in the past we've been very flexible on the words we use in terms of calling things, and he's asking if we remain flexible on those going forward. And to me, the answer is yes. What we're looking for is something that's descriptive. Not our goal isn't to be pejorative, but so anyway, if we have suggestions, I won't entertain things like bunny or Sue, but if we have other words that might describe what the scenario does, we can work on that. So I have a question from Camilla in the back. Okay, the question is, where does the uranium come from for Palo Verde? Specifically, I don't have that answer today. What I do know is that there's a fuels group at Palo Verde, and their job is to secure the uranium needed for the plant. So in terms of precisely where does it come from, I don't know. But that's something we could research and pull together. Nancy?
Could you define the scope of this study again?
Okay, Nancy Burns has asked me to define the scope of the PACE study. The scope for P&M was, please provide me a coordinated set of gas, carbon, and electric pricing curves that I can use in resource planning. The curves were developed using, instead of futures prices, PACE's model of what it costs to produce gas, some assumptions about, for example, announced coal plant retirements are in the model, other assumptions about just how the carbon regulation future can play out. So you take all those things, put them into the model, and then let the model crank through it and produce the numbers. So the goal was, we knew we needed price curves for this process, and frankly what we'll be doing over the next year. So we hired PACE to help us with that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, gas, carbon, and electric pricing curves for finding them.
Correct.
Thanks.
Don?
Are we allowed to know what it costs P&M to hire this company?
Yeah, I can tell you what it cost. I've got them on a not to exceed contract, so I don't have at the moment what I've paid for to date, but it's not a cheap thing to do. But we felt like it was important to the planning process to have, since the piece of information, particularly gas prices, is so important. We felt like it was important to reach beyond what our capabilities are, which frankly is looking at the futures market and then playing with some things to get to more of a fundamentally based price forecast. I have a question in the back from Steve.
Are we going to have access to all the underlying PACE model, or are they going to be, are portions of it going to be considered proprietary?
Again, the question from Steve Michael is if we're going to have access to all the underlying assumptions in the PACE model. We've attempted to provide the assumptions that drive the results of the model in this PowerPoint presentation. So I think my first answer is yes, and I think you have them. So that's the kind of thing, if you look through this and if there's something you think you don't have, let me know. Cliff.
I heard you say that this PACE information was based on national information, but the bottom line is it did narrow it down to P&M's area of consideration.
Yeah, the question is, the PACE modeling was done on a national look, and the question is, does it narrow it down to P&M's area of focus? And the answer is yes. Within their national pricing model, for example, gas, the futures is what's the price to buy it in Louisiana. The price to buy it in New Mexico tends to be less than that. So we have, and within their model, they can balance that out because it's a function of transmission costs, that type of thing. So yes, we're using the pricing, the primary pricing points that we use in our modeling is, it's called El Paso Natural Gas Permian, or natural gas. We also buy gas at San Juan, but those prices lately have been very similar. And then for electricity, the pricing point that we asked for is called the Four Corners Hub. There's just a market dynamic going on right now where the importance of that hub as a trading hub are diminishing. So where we don't have Four Corners pricing hub, we're using Palo Verde pricing hub, and similar to gas, Four Corners and Palo Verde are priced pretty similarly. And then so we take from those pricing points, we add on fuel and transportation costs to get to fuel at our plants. Nancy?
Yeah, we had another question regarding the underlying assumptions in the model. So I'm kind of going back. Did I correctly hear you that one of the built-in assumptions in the model is the announced plant, the announced plans for like the shutdown of the 2 units at San Juan?
Yeah, the question was about my statement earlier that the model included announced plant shutdowns in the model. And so the answer is it depends on which scenario you're looking at. The one that they've called reference case are announced closures, yeah. The concept behind cheap scenario is that recession continues, so policy changes to where people try to reduce the cost of energy, and so there are less plant closures in the cheap scenario than there are in reference. On the other side, with clean, it's a early aggressive implementation on greenhouse gas regulations, and so you end up with within the model assumptions about additional plant closures happening. So it varies based on scenario. And I think in this documentation I provided what the list of closures that are in our neighborhood in at least the reference scenario. Actually, we've got the clean, cheap, and reference retirement list in this handout.
Is there also announced replacement plans included in the scenario?
Yes. Their model, PACE is looking not just what we're doing, they're looking at announcements nationwide. So they'll plug in something that somebody has said they're going to build. For example, they're going to plug in our solar and our La Luz plant because we've said we're going to build it, even though those haven't been approved yet. And then they let the model tell them, hey, wait a second, this region needs more capacity or that region needs more energy. So their model, they will assume future build beyond what's been described or announced. Yes, Dave?
That, PACE is part of Siemens, right? Siemens not totally disinterested in the progress of gas-fired generation. Comment on what kind of firewall they had or what kind of accounting you've had with them for any influence that might have had?
Yeah, the question from Dave Gilmer is about PACE being a subsidiary of Siemens, and Dave correctly has pointed out that Siemens sells natural gas generation. So the request is to talk about how we see a firewall between their interest and the curves that we purchased. So first of all, I'm going to let Pace talk for themselves when we get to there on Friday. Second of all, the group that we're working with on these price curves, P&M has a long relationship with that particular team of folks, and that relationship predates Siemens buying Pace. That's relatively a recent development. So from my point of view, I haven't detected anything I felt like looked biased or fishy. And in fact, if you look at the price curves and compare them to the future prices, the gas prices, even in the cheap scenario, are a little higher than what the futures curve is saying right now. So if they're wanting to use our IRP process to sell a power plant, it'd be in their interest to give us cheap gas prices.
I notice, I think this is the first time a couple of discrete sizes of combined cycle plants and data for new alternatives, 204 and 250. Does that indicate some move towards different technology, more rapid response capability? The 250, is that a Siemens plant?
Yeah, Dave's asking, based on our sheet where we're describing cost for new resources, he's noting that he's seeing a broader range of different types and sizes of gas plants than maybe we had presented, at least at this point in the IRP in the past. And he's asking about, basically why. There's a few reasons to that. One is, first, to go back to one of the points Dave was making, that on our system going forward, we've been adding renewables, energy efficiency, that type of thing. So one of the things you need to maintain a reliable system is the ability to start engines quickly, so you have reserves sitting there for things like a cloud, or the sun goes down, or the wind stops blowing. And then not only that, but we've talked about in the last two IRPs that P&M is transmission constrained in terms of getting power into the Albuquerque area where most of the load is. And so we do have some quick start, easy to regulate type plants on our system, but they're outside the transmission constraint. So that's one of the items that supports WALU's, is getting that capability where it can be responsive to load. So that's one point. The other is, going into this IRP, we knew we were going to be looking at replacing a lot of capacity at San Juan. So what we've done so far is try to provide a spectrum of things that provide capacity. So that's gas plants, in addition to everything else that we've got in there. We're at the point right now where what we've got on the list, we call them generic or best in breed or some other term, and Tom might be able to help me come up with something that's not pejorative there. But what the goal is to model something that kind of tells us what size fits the best. And then when we find an outcome that says this is the right size, what we're going to do is break out that, because, for example, on that list, you've got 177 megawatts. That we're modeling a specific generating resource there. We have a report from Black and Beach where there's up to 10 things that could serve that need for that size. So if we get to the step where that's definitely the size of resource we want, then we'll start building the model out with all 10 of those machines to see if they're in the modeling, if there's a preference of all 10. If we can find a preference in the modeling, then we'll scope down our RFP and only ask for the best ones there. If we can't, then when we do an RFP for that resource, we'll make it open. So even though we model the GE machine, we might get a Rolls-Royce instead. So that's just, I'm going at length on this just to try to illustrate how this planning process works versus how we bring resources online. Okay, I've been going at it for about an hour now, and I succeeded in getting a few chins on the chest. So I think it's good to take a break. So we'll take about a 15-minute break, get back up here at a quarter till. And again, there's coffee, water, mini muffins in a bag. Avail yourself of the restroom and take advantage of the opportunity to talk to the folks that are here. Ask you about your ratings. Yeah, she's in the back of it. Yeah, no, I introduced myself.
How are you finding out?
In the back, them like coal.
You are.
That's it.
Yeah, the other guy. Well, like the other 10.
Oh, no. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, no. I was just wondering how we.
So, yeah, I knew you can now.
I got lots of. I don't give it up. So he just didn't go on.
Yeah, we're doing that.
I did.
I'll do.
One of the reasons we have
We are, unfortunately, yeah. Not always great, not always positive news. That's right.
but we have to check.
Well, yeah, it's nobody really loves a big ugly transmission line going through their backyard. In New Mexico, as you know, Missouri considers they've got a very big backyard. They're not happy, even though they don't own the land. They don't really control it. They control everybody. And a lot of conservation, a lot of people are concerned about negative impacts on mission and objectives.
All those things led into.
I would appreciate it.
So we will look in the modeling. What we have is the next portion. Take advantage of the place already there.
That's all I can tell you. We're out there taking it. I think we are.
So that is our option in the modeling. But in order to get back for you,
We're out there.
that information we're looking at, you know,
Yeah, well,
we haven't looked at
Well, you know, what I would say is,
the corridor, because
we've been in this
no,
federal process.
we wouldn't have to be
Engage the military all of those 5 years. That we don't have to do. So, to one side of the oh my gosh, they've only parked in the last car, it's terrible, and they've never reality is very different. The fact is, they don't money. The answer is offering. They've offered. We've moved the line 4 times now to try to accommodate one. Put it here, and I'll be honest, if we know what we do now, we would have done it different. But the first time, it meant to them, and we actually, of course, they're cooperating agencies, so for 5 minutes of the process, we did that. On down and we started there.
well,
We met with the Secretary General, and they said, we're thinking of putting it here on USAID, right? The one major area. And the Brigadier General said, that might be okay. We got a letter from him in writing saying, thank you for the meeting. If you put it here, it
well,
might
that's
be okay.
something I addressed in higher level.
Right. But then, a couple years later, a new Brigadier General arrived, get a letter that says, oh no, that's no good. Well, so we said, so where is maybe better? So we said, up here. So we moved the line up there.
Building.
And then a year later, they said, oh no, that's totally unacceptable. Move it up here. So from our perspective, we've gone through this process. We've tried to come up with a solution. For some reason, the military forgets that, but now it's, well, something's changed. The problem they really have, we're going through a legal process. underlying legislation that governs environmental assessments, the EIS, National Environmental Protection Act, Adaptive Economic Theory. That process, which the feeling is, you know, it's all about, tell us what the impacts are, let's look at all the kinds of things in the project. This process federal government does impact on air, water, visual resources, economic, social, archaeological, biodiversity, and all that stuff, right? So the law defines this process and it says anybody in the world who wants to say there's an impact, right, to say that, public participation, but it's based on sort of factual, scientific estimates of impacts. Military can't play that, they can't participate in that process the way they want to. What they want to do is say, look, we don't know what we're going to do in 30 years out here with our testing, and we've got to preserve it. So we don't know. The law says, I'm sorry, we don't consider what you guys want to do 30 years. If you think about it more logically, it's not projects. Any kind of project allows future possibilities. So we have technical perspective, very happy. And that's why they haven't been able, I'm trying to argue their case, right? But I'm saying that's why they said, and I can understand, they said 4 years ago when we went to it, well, maybe back then we thought maybe it'd be okay here, but now things have changed. We're saying, you can't do that. We're following the law. They don't like that process. So they're using an alternative approach. And all national security is close to base because be an effective advocate for their position through the process. So it's a problem. And I was down listening to legislative committee last Thursday in Reynosa, economic and rural development, and I got an earful from one of the elected legislators from southern New Mexico, and White Sands was there, and you know, it was all kind of those typical, come in and let us beat you up about how concerned we are on the impacts, and what are you guys doing, and aren't you listening to the military here? And you know, you do the best you can of trying to explain that our listening. We are sympathetic, but we need a route. We've got to fix it. And we spent 5 years, and you got to understand from our perspective, we're kind of skeptical. Every time we've done something, the military said, we know it's a year later. So
Yeah,
that's sort of where we are.
They would go back to one of their earlier suggestions. That would be.
And then, they do this trying to develop. You know that you're always going to have to try. And unfortunately, the facts don't end up mattering for public opinion. It's kind of more about how people feel and perception. White Sands is umbrella. Yes, I do. It's the MC a long time. Yeah. Going well. You're here trying to promote demand.
I need to check my
look at the opportunities. You're in the mix. I want to be in the hunt. Good.
Hi, for folks waiting on the webinar, we're still in the middle of our break here. So I imagine you're hearing some hubbub, but we expect to resume pretty quick.
What does it look like? Okay, we're still working on 2 projects. The big one in the news, of course, is Great Deer. That's getting very close. Just about order 1,000. Well, I think we're going to succeed. I think that off teams, others off teams, they're on teams, others off teams. Well, you know, I think I mean, comparison, you're not going to find data to compare to another public property in the wholesale market. I think if you go like it's annualized, you're not going to be able to find that granular. And just a comparison. And I can't tell how they calculate it. But they're I don't have a good answer. Yeah, and I think that's probably okay. So what I'm going to say is representative of what they're saying. There's not a requirement. There's not a requirement based. They have to provide a last resort. And then are they doing it just in Mexico? Are they doing it across all three of their states? Like, what are you doing now? And they're not going to get so they're well, my understanding is the upfront has a 60-day superior what she's technically supposed to do. And that's finally she gets in and if EIS, there's a post-project resources, federal land, state. She's allowed to say, pocket changes, resource management. First one ever. That's right. Nobody's ever buried 35 miles. Economic proposal. Probably 20 to 30 million a month. It's special cable use. As I understand it, there's a bunch of problems. Very under the process. Very. Right. That's the loss. So,
Online, you're not sending anything in. Very small, and it's not going to go quite. I can oh, good. Okay. Yeah, I think I've done a better job of that.
Hello, this is Dean in Albuquerque trying to reestablish the phone or the audio part of this webinar. I hope I'm getting through to someone. So please let me know if you can hear or not. Thank you. That's the only place I've ever seen this.
Yeah, this is right. I guess it doesn't matter, right? You ever asked her?
Yeah. Tempted to call towards being
You guys. They're still that job going For the people in the room, we've had a technical difficulty on the webinar, so we're going to
try to get that thing back up and running before we restart the presentation. So feel free to take the extra time.
Yeah, I won't be here Friday.
You mean high time for these. So what happened? Did it just run out of time?
Personally, to be okay. Oh, is the phone back up? Yeah, but didn't give us our audio. So I'm not sure. Oh, yeah. So we tried one. Great. Now the screen went. Did we plug in the power? It just was inactive, I guess. Okay, thank you. I just heard from Lisa. I'm hoping everyone is able to hear again. It should get started. Pat?
Okay, we're back up online with our webinar, so I'll get started with the presentation again at, let's say, the top of the hour, 10 o'clock. Okay, it looks like everybody's back in their seat, and we've got webinar working again, and have heard that webinar folks can hear. So I'll get restarted. Just to review where we're at, talked about the process overall, talked about some of the key steps early on in the process is collecting data. And then, when I was talking about the overview of the process, I was saying two of the big tools for us to test and understand risks are two items called scenario analysis and sensitivity analysis. Something we chose to do with IRP this time, again, to try to improve IRP process, walk through the entire thing at the beginning so that folks could see the whole thing. So when we're working through other topics as we go forward, you'll have hopefully a better foundation for where we're going, and it'll help our conversation as we go along. The other is that one of the big items that affects the IRP that we're doing right now is the planned closure of 2 units of San Juan generating station. So in order to illustrate the process, we thought it would be 2 things instructive to the process to talk through different how scenarios can be designed. And it's also, I think, instructive to our customers to show how resource replacement options for San Juan are starting to sort out using the current set of assumptions that we're using. Excuse me. So we've built scenarios around two items. The first item is the scenario that we believe is what will happen and what we're supporting, and we're calling it the revised state implementation plan. State implementation plan is a technical legal term. It talks about compliance plan for a rule called the Regional Haze Rule, and within New Mexico, the Regional Haze Rule affects the operation at San Juan Generating Station. So the Sept State Implementation Plan is a plan that allows for compliance with what the Regional Haze Rule requires. So just to walk through what that, where we're at on what we're calling revised state implementation plan, and I'm saying revised just because there was a different state implementation plan about a year ago. Now, this was approved by the what I'm calling revised state implementation plan, and I apologize that this is an acronym and I'm going to use it and it might get confusing, so stop me and I'll back up and make sure I'm precise on what I'm saying here. But clearly, revised state implementation plan was approved by the New Mexico Environment Improvement Board, the EIB, on September 5th. And what the plan requires is retiring units 2 and 3 at San Juan Generating Station by the end of 2017. And it requires installation of something called the Selective Non-Catalytic Reduction Technology on San Juan Units 1 and 4 by January 31st of 2016. And that's assuming that the process follows the calendar where EPA approves the state action by about November of next year. So that is a scenario. The implications of the scenario for IRP hopefully are obvious, but I'll point them out. And the big one is retiring units 2 and 3 at San Juan Generating Station and investing the capital in the remaining 2 units for SNCR. So the retirement creates a situation where I talked about how we had a peak demand this summer. So we'll be looking, we need to replace the capacity at San Juan. We'll be looking at different ways that capacity can be replaced under the same construct that we described for IRP. We're looking for reliable, cost-effective, and looking at the impact on the environment of the replacement options. And then in order to, IRP, we talked about balance, talked about trade-offs. So in order to compare, contrast, understand what the SIP means, we've also run a scenario on federal implementation plan. That's the rule of the road today. It is what EPA has said will comply with Regional Haze Rule at San Juan. We expect as we work through this process or hope that EPA approves the state plan, and when that happens, that becomes the implementation plan at San Juan. But the federal implementation plan, the key difference is you don't retire any of the units at San Juan. But what you do is install technology called selective catalytic reduction at the plant. Both selective catalytic reduction and selective non-catalytic reduction, what they do is reduce nitrogen oxide emissions at the plant. Selective non-catalytic reduction, while you will have a significant reduction in nitrogen oxide emissions, it's not as big a reduction at the existing units as you would have if we install the selective catalytic reduction. But why the state plan works is by retiring 2 units, you also get a decrease in particulate emissions, SO2 emissions, other emissions associated with burning coal that affect visibility. So for the point of regional haze rule, which is improved visibility, these 2 plans give you the same visibility improvement. The first plan has some additional environmental benefits that you don't see with the first plan. And what we're going to walk through today is a demonstration that when we look at the cost of installing SCR at San Juan, we also have opportunities to retire units and replace those units that are retired for a lower total cost. So within P&M, we see this as an example of the kind of balance that we're looking to achieve. Because you do, compared to the regulation we have right now, we believe the state implementation plan results in a lower cost. We know it will result in a reliable portfolio, and when we're looking at the environment, it also provides a larger improvement over a broader range of environmental impacts associated with coal generation. So those are the scenarios I'm going to talk about. I tried to summarize them in some detail here. I'm sure as we work through the next few slides, if you don't remember what they are, we can walk back in and talk about it some more. So then the other key item on risk analysis and understanding is the sensitivity tool. So we've got 2 items that I'm going to illustrate today that are examples of sensitivities, and I'll show you how they play out in the results. One sensitivity is adding Palo Verde Nuclear Generating Station Unit 3 to the portfolio. So there isn't a cost established for doing that. It exists, so we don't have to build it. So what we'll be looking at in IRP is how high the cost of adding that resource is before it's not a good deal for the customers or for our portfolio. So the sensitivity on that is the cost of adding that to the portfolio from a net cost point of view. And another sensitivity, and when I get to the results you'll see this, but for the first time in our modeling, we're seeing that solar photovoltaic is coming in as an economic choice. So there's a couple of reasons for that. One, as I described earlier, the price has been coming down, so lower price matters. And then another is, right now what we have on our system is called a fixed tilt system, and the panels are installed and they just don't move all day. So we know what the generation of those panels are because we have data, we operate the system, we know what they can do. What we proposed in the filing we made in July, and what we're showing as an existing resource going forward in the portfolio, is a different technology than the fixed tilt. It's called single axis tracking. So, those of you familiar with the concept, it's just you've got one axis and you've got a motor, so as the day goes on, the panel tilts. And the benefit of that is when you're setting up the fixed tracking system, what we've done in the past, because RPS compliance is measured on energy, not on capacity, we've set the tilt on those panels so that we would get the most energy out of those panels over the day. The sun tracks across the sky, you're not directly pointed at the panel except for one moment during the day. So you set the tilt so that the lineup between the radiation received from the sun matches the tilt of the panel, so that you get the best energy production during the year. But the single axis tracking system, the panel can move. So what that means is you get a little more energy through the whole year, and the panel will be pointed more directly at the sun during hour ending 4 o'clock, which tends to be our peak hour on our system. So the reasons why we're seeing the solar as an economic choice are price is cheaper, and it's cheaper for a machine that's more capable than what we have on the system today. As I already described, I don't know what the price is going to be when we go out and try to buy it. There's a range. It could be less, it could be more, it could be the same. So that was one of the things that we tested in our modeling, is the pricing. And then another is, we have the data that tells us exactly what the fixed tilt panels do throughout the day. We don't have any single axis tracking panels on the system yet. So we've got bids, we've verified the bids using data from other systems, but solar resource in New Mexico is unique. So just to address the fact that maybe we don't know exactly what this panel will produce on every hour of the day, as a sensitivity in our modeling, we vary the output per hour on those panels. So I think I have a question in the back from Camilla.
What's your layout of life?
Okay, I have a question from Camilla, and it's about what is my opinion of why the price is going down, try to identify different factors. First of all, the price going down is something that was predicted. I mean, going back to the 2008 IRP, that was an issue that, we're looking at projections of what the price of solar was then versus industry expert predictions of what it was going to be. And the prediction back then was that the price would come down as more installations happened, as the technology developed. That happened. Then there's also a question about how much of that is tax impact. There is an impact of taxes on what we think about adding that resource right now. For right now, there's something called an investment tax credit for solar that expires in 2016. So in our modeling, we priced the solar two ways. We priced it for what happens if we build it and take advantage of the tax credit that's in place today. And then for the dates after the credit applies, we increase the price because we don't know if that credit will remain in place or stay the same. So we modeled the tax situation the way the tax code is written today. Did that answer your question? And that could have another question.
Under the scenario example, it talks about the state implementation plan and the federal. Do you have to meet both of those? And since the federal is different from the state, if you vary from it, you're going to have to go through this process with the feds to help them approve it.
Yeah, the question is, since I'm talking about a state plan and a federal plan, roughly are we going to have to meet both plans? And I'll give you my answer to that. Not a lawyer, so I'll try not to veer into that land, but we're only going to have to comply with one plan. The plan that is the rule right now is the federal plan. We believe that the state plan, which was proposed by P&M, State of New Mexico, and EPA, is a good plan. So we believe that as the process goes on, the strength of that plan will reveal itself if it's not known already, and that will result in EPA adopting the state plan as the plan for San Juan Generating Station.
I think we touched on it previously, Pat, but it would be helpful for the solar resources that are being considered to have some sort of capacity factor estimate, which will pick up the value, the quality of the resource plus the technology as an assumption, and it's not in any of the data yet. I think we're lucky.
Yeah, I agree, Dave. Was just we're reiterating something that's just an oversight in the data provided today. We need to provide capacity factor comparison for the two different solar technologies that I've talked about now, the existing resource and the single-axis tracking.
Pat, could you confirm which procurement you have prices from the next solar technology, and you would have to rebid it at a certain point in the future to actually determine the actual. I got the impression when you said that you actually have real prices from the RFP.
Yeah, Tom Singer has asked if what the basis is for the pricing we're using right now. What we're modeling, like I said, the first shot out of the box, what we modeled is the cost of single-axis tracking for the procurement we've proposed to make. So we took the winning bid from the solar build that we proposed in our renewable energy plan as the basis for our analysis. Then we were looking at that, and like I said, when we were going through bid evaluation process, we were hearing different things about where is solar pricing at right now. So that caused us to want to make sure before get up here and say solar is economic that that analysis holds true if next time we do a procurement process the price is higher. So what's the process from here? We've got a procurement. We went through an RFP and have a procurement online. What we expect would happen out of this IRP process, assuming that this analysis remains steady, is we will launch. We need to do another renewable RFP anyway, because part of the procurement plan was to buy RECs for renewable energy certificates for 2015. That's only good through 2015. We're going to need to have a plan to comply with 2016. So we will do another renewable RFP, and that's something that we're trying to squeeze in while we're doing IRP, is add the renewable RFP and get that launched and on the street. So that's something that I expect will happen in the next few months, another renewable RFP. We'll use that as confirmation of what the pricing is. And again, assuming the recommendation holds, that's what would be the basis for our next purchase. Because frankly, if the concept is the price has been coming down, I think we're better off if we go for another RFP just to see if it kept coming down. So, yeah, question.
One question is on the single-axis tracking. Do you see a differential in maintenance costs and how you factor that in between fixed and
And the question is about differential in maintenance cost for fixed tilt versus single axis tracking. There is a difference. The operation and maintenance for a single axis tracking system is higher because in addition to whatever you were going to do to maintain the panels, you also have to maintain the gears and motors that tilt the panels. So that is included. The concept that we're going to have to maintain those items are included in the O&M price for the solar PV that we have on this sheet here. But what I haven't provided is the contrast of what's the O&M price for the fixed tilt panels. Dave?
You said you're going to do another renewable RFP. Does that include wind?
I think it needs to.
Yeah, because SPS is buying 700 megawatts for 2.3 cents a kilowatt hour.
So the question is, the renewable RFP, will it include wind, and then given some data that I can't verify on what SPS is paying. But I think if you look at what we've done with renewable RFPs to date, we've made them all source renewable RFPs. That's got its pluses and minuses, but at the moment, I think we will include all resources on there. Okay, so I've talked about the scenarios we're using, talked about the sensitivities we're using, and then the next slide was just a summary of the type of analysis we do. you know, again, we're pointing in a direction. Reality is, we iterate, but it just, you try to build up to a good plan. Just a reminder where we're at in the process. We talked about the environment that we're doing IRP in, lots of rules, regulations. We collect data. Within the data, we look at feasible alternatives. Where that shows up is on this sheet. You know, for the future alternatives, you see there's a line about first year available. So some of these things we could get online sooner than others, so that factors in. And then where we're at right now is after we put together sensitivities, the alternatives, designed our risks, we do portfolio optimization. So that's the step that we're at now I'm going to discuss next. And then after portfolio optimization, talk about risk analysis. And that's kind of a, for me anyway, the whole process is designed to understand risk. But there's a piece of it where we call risk analysis, specifically where we really test potential that the future will be different than current. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. And then finally, I'll show you how this pyramid stacks up using our current assumptions and the scenario design and the portfolio optimization based on our current assumptions. Okay, this next slide, just if you've been in IRP, you've heard this before. The concept is that hopefully by now you see there's lots of variables, lots of moving parts, if you will, lots of input assumptions. So the electric industry doesn't try to do this just using spreadsheets or something like that. P&M has purchased the software called Strategist. It's a pretty widely used model throughout the industry. The real strength of it for portfolio optimization is with those scenarios I'm talking about, we could have up to 5,000 portfolios that would meet the criteria. And then we can look through those 5,000, and the big output will be looking at the net present value cost. So net present value cost is something you'll hear me using. I'm going to call it NPV. What goes into Strategist is the cost to build and operate anything new, and the cost to operate the items that are already on the system now. So you add up, you look at that on an annual basis, and then using the concept that what I know today I'm more comfortable with than what I know 20 years from now, you take something called a net present value. So the future is discounted, and you add them all up, and you come up with a net number that is then useful to compare different portfolio solutions across different scenarios. And then I can bring somebody up here to talk for 2 hours about Strategist if you want. But I warned you to be careful what you ask for. Okay, so we had 2 scenarios. I'm going to show you 3 portfolio optimizations. The first 2 are portfolio optimizations using a state implementation plan. So a reminder, that's the one where we're planning to shut down units 2 and 3 at San Juan Generating Station. And of those 2, we've got one where you include Palo Verde Unit 3 and one where you don't include Palo Verde Unit 3. So just stepping through what those portfolios look like through the period of time where we would be replacing capacity at San Juan Generating Station. I mean, there are additional portfolio additions that happen after this time period, but for purposes of today and to illustrate the process, we're showing where we're at through the 2018 time frame. So again, we'll install at SCR on units 1 and 4, so that the cost of that and the operational impact of that is included in the model. Retire San Juan units 2 and 3 by December 31st, 2017. So in the model at the end of 2017, the resource isn't there. We also have some assumptions in there of, because we intend to shut the units down, that changes our maintenance philosophy on the plants. We'll keep doing safety, we'll keep doing environmental compliance, but long-term items, things that might be a 10-year part or a 15-year part, we might try to stretch those out so that we can get to this date without spending the money. So that savings over our budget is included in the analysis. And then when we go through, here's the portfolio that comes out of portfolio optimization as shown as the most cost-effective right now. So that includes building 40 megawatts of single-axis tracking solar in 2016. Lots of reasons for that. One is the date. We already talked about the impact of the tax code, that there's a ITC that's currently at 30%, it drops to 10%, so there's an advantage to building that in advance of 2018. Another advantage of building it in that time frame is, again, we've got a renewable portfolio standard requirement that we have to meet in 2016. This solar will generate RECs that then could be used to comply with that. And then the next item on here, additional capacity in San Juan Unit 4, currently assuming 78, 79 megawatts. There's a process going on right now among the owners at San Juan Generating Station. There's a total of 9 owners. Each unit has a different ownership. P&M is the only one that is the owner of all 4 units. So through that process, some of the owners won't be owners at San Juan Generating Station after the 2 units shut down. Some owners will be. And so P&M is working through that with the owners and the deal that looks like is the current assumption is that in order to facilitate that process of this ownership change, that P&M will be acquiring an additional 79 megawatts in San Juan Unit 4. What that means for total generation capacity at San Juan is reflected on, I think it's on this loan and resource sheet. Oh, actually this load and resource sheet doesn't show it, but right now we own a total of 783 megawatts at San Juan Generating Station. This process that I'm showing up here will reduce that number by 340 megawatts. So if all you're looking for is a 1-for-1 capacity replacement, we need to get 340 megawatts on peak to replace the San Juan Generating Station. So another resource that shows up in our most cost-effective portfolio is a gas turbine, combustion turbine. That its role in the portfolio is to replace capacity that I just talked about. We don't see that it dispatches that much, but it is important for maintaining a reliable system. Similarly, we're adding another 80 megawatts of gas peaking capacity. The distinction between this heavy frame and aero derivatives is more or less, excuse me. I better get a drink of water. This aeroderivative class is something that's based similar to a jet engine, flies on an airplane. The heavy frame is the same concept, but it's a bigger machine. So turning it on, getting it up to temperature, getting the emissions settled down, that takes longer for one of these heavy frame machines. With the aeroderivatives, you can turn them on quickly, you get to temperature and your emissions profile quickly. So it's more flexible if you're turning it on and off than a heavy frame, and that's reflected in the costs. You'll see there's differences in the operation maintenance cost of those 2 classes. So we're getting a mix of those in this portfolio. And then finally, still need more capacity and energy. So in this portfolio, we've got another 20 megawatts of solar in 2018. Okay, so this next portfolio, same scenario, state implementation plan. Oh, hold on, I got a question for that.
Yeah, do you know offhand what the ramp-up times are for the Euro?
is what I'm sorry. What I was thinking of is a family joke that my father, when he would go visit his father-in-law, my grandfather in Missouri, and he would ask him, well, how long is it going to take me to drive from this town to that town? My grandfather would say, well, it depends if you get behind a snowplow or not. So I'm sorry that I stopped because that joke just worked itself through my brain. But the answer is that within heavy frame, you've got lots of different machines that solve that class, and they have lots of different capabilities. So there's a range. In general, it's slower, and it takes a little bit longer to get, up to its peak operating performance. The aeroderivative class, you can count that as non-spinning reserve. So you get it up to full power even less than like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And you don't have to pay a maintenance penalty every time you turn it on and off. So that's why we're drawing the distinction line on that. My best quantification of that answer is on this known technology. Yes, Tom?
Could you clarify whether the 40 megawatt solar is part of what the companies need to acquire to file the RPS, or is it over and above your forecast of 2016 solar procurement as part of that?
With this round of modeling, we weren't putting a constraint on to meet the RPS. So what we're saying is this is a cost-effective resource addition. And then with that resource addition, they will generate RECs. And so the assumption is we'll use those RECs to help us comply with renewable portfolio standard. The amount of RECs we need is dependent on energy sales and a bunch of variables, but the 40 megawatts gets us close to the amount of RECs we're expecting to need to buy for 2016. James?
And, you mentioned on retiring units 2 and 3 that you're taking a credit for reduced maintenance and things like that, but isn't there also a cost of shutting those units down? So far, I've never heard anybody mention about the cost for closing the unit down. I mean, you can't just turn them off with the switch. Is there a cost, and is that included?
Yeah, you're right. James Crawford asked if I talked about the credit for a different maintenance plan in San Juan if we know we're going to shut the units down. He's correct in saying there's not just items that you can save money on. There are also other items that you might have to do if you weren't going to shut the plant down. And through our budgeting process, we've tried to include the net of those in the cost of what we're seeing to operate those 2 units for the next week.
You know what that number is, how big it costs?
The net is a reduction, so I don't know the pieces of the net. Offhand, I don't know how much are we saving versus how much would we have to do in addition to what we're saving. So I don't have that answer for you right now.
So there's no cost for shutting down?
I think, I'm not sure I'm understanding your questions because I know obviously what I'm answering. What I was talking about is the operating cost.
You just walk out the door and leave it, or do you have to secure it or tear it down? Or?
Yeah, the current assumption is that P&M and Tucson own the site. So what we will do is secure the units so that it's safe to work on units 1 and 4 while those 2 units are there. And then also those 2 units, because unit 1 is very similar to unit 2 and unit 3 is very similar to unit 4, those units that have been shut down can be a source of spare parts and that type of thing for the other units that are operating. So those are the type of things that we're thinking through and working out when we talk about the cost for that plant. But then in terms of overall cost, tear the thing down, the assumption is right now we're just going to secure it so that it's safe to operate the other 2 units while those 2 units are there. So there will be things like fencing and other safety procedures, but a big cost to dismantle in our assumptions right now.
expenditures, you can add your CT, your steam turbines, or steam generators, basically have a CC.
The question from Dave Van Winkle is if it's possible to add a steam generator to a turbine and create a combined cycle plant. The answer to that is yes, and we did include in our modeling that as a potential for some of the reasons I'll share with you as we get further on. Adding a lot more gas consumption to the portfolio looks risky. So I think that's one of the things that we will talk about more as we go through this process. But the best portfolio are the combustion turbines. We did give it the option to pick combined cycle. Okay. The next portfolio we'll walk through is what happens again under the revised Sept. So we're shutting down 2 units of San Juan, installing SNCR, and we let the model pick Palo Verde 3 as a resource replacement option. What we're finding is that looks like a very good thing to do. The portfolio, as we work through it, starts out the same. You know, we got the 40 megawatts of single-axis solar tracking. We'll acquire the additional capacity in 4, and then in order to meet the capacity and energy 2018 when we shut down the units, we'll bring in 134 megawatts of Palo Verde Unit 3, and we'll add the heavy gas frame peaker at, right now the assumption is at San Juan. So what is different from this one versus the one I showed you is less gas peaking, and we don't build the 20 megawatts of solar, but we do build the 134 megawatts of Palo Verde Unit 3. So then again, this is the second scenario, the federal implementation plan. We're using it as a compare and contrast to the state implementation plan. I think it's important for us to show why we believe the state implementation plan is better than the FCR. So we're showing for that contrast reason. And so what happens in the modeling for the federal implementation plan portfolio is we install selective catalytic reduction technology at all 4 units of San Juan. So we've got the capital cost of that improvement plus the whatever operational impact that we have for that improvement. And then what happens to the portfolio between now and 2018, we still pick the single-axis tracking solar even under the scenario where we're not retiring San Juan generating station. Got a question?
With and without Palo Verde scenarios, the difference between, how did you get to those? Did you have a different price in Palo Verde, whereas in the first one, price was high enough that other resources were selected and then you lowered the price? In the second scenario, where Palo Verde was selected and other resources fell out, is that how these 2 different scenarios were created?
There was a different process for each scenario. How we created the Palo Verde 3 scenario was we included the resource at a starting price. We saw that it picked it. So then we knew what the other portfolio was, and just internally we're calling it the gas portfolio because that's dominated by a lot of gas capacity addition. So with using the gas portfolio as kind of a benchmark, then we just kept changing the price of Palo Verde 3 until we got to the point where Palo Verde 3 was so expensive that the most optimal portfolio was the gas portfolio. So that's how we tested the sensitivity of the portfolio to the cost of adding Palo Verde 3.
Can you share what that price was where it flipped so Palo Verde was not economic?
Yeah, I think we've skipped a slide here, but you've got this slide. Well, go back to where we were at. This slide I put in there just to kind of summarize where we're at in terms of the modeling results. We skipped a slide where I could talk about the risk tail, but we'll go ahead and take the question now, which is, can we describe what the price is for where this Palo Verde portfolio flips over to the gas portfolio? So, I mean, this isn't a typo. We've got the same price here for the revised SIP, so that's our SIP with Palo Verde 3 versus revised SIP without Palo Verde 3. This is what the modeling looks like when we include Palo Verde 3 at a cost of $3,350 a kilowatt. So that's a high number. So the point is that including Palo Verde 3 up to that cost gives you a similar result in terms of cost for the portfolio. And the similar result is, first of all, remember these units are millions of dollars. So this is $6.9 billion versus $7.1 billion. So you're cheaper than the 4 SCR case with the SIP cases, and the Palo Verde 3 portfolio, because that's a high number, has a potential of being cheaper than the portfolio that doesn't include Palo Verde.
So, to make sure I understand, so what you're saying is that some of the assumptions that you put in here, at any price under $3,300, you say you Palo Verde is a cheaper alternative than the actual alternative. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll reiterate the question for the webinar folks, plus to make sure I got it right. But the concept we're illustrating here is that any price for Palo Verde 3 at or less than $3,350 a kilowatt, two things happen. The MPV of the portfolio gets less, and you pick Palo Verde 3 over the gas portfolio as a preferred resource. Is that a fair summary? Can you step back one minute? No.
We missed. It's not in there.
But the third scenario, I mean, basically, the technology on the floor plan, supported by the federal plan, is more expensive than building the other alternatives, the gas plants and all of that. The cost of that technology on all four is gas.
Yeah, I'll repeat the question from Camilla, and hopefully I get it right. But the question is what I'm saying, that building SCR on the 4 units at San Juan more expensive than replacing the retired units and adding SNCR? And the answer to that is yes. Oh, can we go back, Brian, to the slide with that? Nope. I apologize because we're missing a slide from our presentation here, but I think you have it in the handout. But okay, so anyway, go back to the question. A lot more. If all we're looking at is the gas replacement portfolio, difference between 7.1 billion and 6.9 billion is 200 million over a 20-year period. So one of the things I also wanted to talk about on this slide is the concept of risk. So what's going on in our modeling is those things that I told you are projections, like demand and prices, particularly gas and carbon. We know that any projection we pick for those variables is likely to be inaccurate. So what we do is we build and this is a math term, a distribution of prices around our projections. So, like on the gas slide, if say we were saying it's $5 an MMBTU, there's within a reasonable range. It could be as low as 3. It might be as high as 8. So we build a math projection around those price curves, and we create what we're calling a distribution. So we'll do that for the price, of gas. We do that for the price of carbon. We do that for the demand. Our distributions are all based on, and if you have your handout, I'm talking about slide 22. So we've got, if you remember your statistics class, load looks like, we call it a normal curve. It's the bell curve. And then things like gas pricing and CO2 pricing, which are related to each other. Gas might be $4 MMBtu now. It can't be less than 0, but it could be more than 10. So you end up with a different distribution for gas. We call it a log normal curve. So we build distributions for all those things. And then we use a random number generator to give us a sample from each of those distributions, and that creates a price profile. So that price profile will be, load that's maybe, 5% less than what we were modeling. Gas price, instead of at $4, it's at $6. And then carbon, instead of at, $20, it might be $30. So that's a price profile, one of them. We do that 500 times. So we'll create, or at least 500 times. We try to, let the math guide us to what's the right amount of that before we're overdoing it. So we'll create 500 price profiles. We'll run the 500 price profiles through the model using those portfolios I described. So what you get out of that is, instead of a net present value over 20 years, you get 500 net present values over 20 years. And so we can run some statistics on that. One is just the mean, so that's the number I'm reporting here. But another is a concept called risk tail. And it's like a golf score, the lower number is better. What it is a measure of how broad the distribution of these net present values are if we give it a wide range of prices. So the other thing I was hoping to illustrate with this slide is, first of all, not only that the Palo Verde 3 price sensitivity, but even at the same net present value of those portfolios, when you add Palo Verde 3, you're less exposed to gas prices that are risky, you're less exposed to carbon prices that are risky. So the Palo Verde 3 portfolio is less risky than both the 4SCR case and the Palo Verde, the state implementation plan without Palo Verde. And another interesting thing to notice on this is the biggest number out of the three risks numbers is the one where you use the gas portfolio. And the reason for that is, right now we generate our power with coal, nuclear. We've been adding solar, wind. Those are things that are all fairly stable in terms of prices. As we add more gas, we add more exposure to risk of price going up. So that's another strength of the Palo Verde portfolio, is that it is the least risky of the three. So I got a bunch of questions here, so I'll start taking them. Dave?
Remind us what the present ownership structure for Palo Verde 3 is with regard to P&M share, and what will actually determine that minimum price that P&M or P&M non-regulated would take for it.
The question is to remind what the ownership structure and share is of Palo Verde 3, and then talk about the price, the process for which we determine what this price is. Is that a fair answer? So, Dave, Palo Verde 3, there are 3 units at Palo Verde. All 3 units are owned in equal shares by the participant owners at Palo Verde. I can't remember the full list of Palo Verde. I think it's around 7 owners. Arizona Public Service is the largest. I think Southern California is an owner. El Paso is an owner. And P&M is an owner. And P&M's ownership is 10.2%. And it's the same across all 3 units. So we own 10.2% of all of Palo Verde, and that is 10.2% of each of the 3 units. Then right Palo Verde was built in a time where there was projections for lots of increased electric demand. The demand didn't happen. So through the regulatory process, and I'm summarizing here, and I'm looking to Ben and Gerard to help me out, and because I wasn't frankly in high school when this stuff was going on. And Prasad would also be able to help us with this one. But it was determined that Palo Verde Unit 3 wasn't necessary to meet PNM's customer demand back then. So it fell into a bucket called excluded. So PNM owns it. It's currently excluded from rates. So the process for determining the price will be a regulatory process at the PRC, where we will file to ask to add it to the portfolio at a given price. But because it's excluded, it's a situation where if not treated fairly on the price of that unit, PNM will have a decision it's got to make. Okay, Cliff, did I answer your question? Okay, so I talked about
One more. Dave, one more quick question about Palo Verde. When you do this type of analysis, is there transmission cost company?
Yeah, the question from Dave Van Winkle is, in this analysis, are transmission costs comprehended? And the answer is yes. We need to rent some more transmission space to get the power from Palo Verde to the Four Corners hub, where San Juan is located. And we have a reservation on capacity. And so assuming this plan happens, we know what the cost of that is based on today's rates, and that cost is included, which is off the top of my head, I don't remember, but we can get that back yet. I think it's on the order of like $5 million a year. That's not right. Oh, and then back up because I left off one of my sensitivities. I told you that we looked at that single-axis tracking system pretty hard. And so we looked at it, across a range of prices. A decrease right now, what we proposed in the July filing is buying it at roughly $2,000 a kilowatt. We looked at it at a price where that goes down at a rate similar to what it's been going down at. We also looked at what happens if the price rolls back to what we got the previous year, so that's around $2,300 a kilowatt. And then we also looked at it for the operational range all the way from what if it's fixed tilt, so that's about the least you could expect to get out of the single-axis tracking system, up to the capability that we believe that we will get. And so across the range, if all you looked at was price and left the capability of what we expect to get, or if all you looked at was capability and left the price at the 2,000, it came in under both of those ideas. The only way that we were thinking maybe we shouldn't recommend this is if you're running fixed tilt capability at the high end of the price. So it took the combination of both of those things for us to think this isn't a resource that we should be proposing. So just wanted to mention that as to complete my discussion of the sensitivity analysis that we've done so far.
So you're describing a price per kW for different solar configuration. I assume that as you go through a tracking system, your price per kWh goes down. Do you have any of those numbers on top of your head?
Well, we filed a price per kWh with the renewal plan, and I remember it being on the order of like $70 a kilowatt hour. And so that's just $2,000 per kilowatt to construct for it, about $70 per kilowatt hour. Yeah, per megawatt hour, sorry. 7 cents per kilowatt hour.
And the price
If you go to fixed, the price goes up because you get less megawatt hours. And then with the tracking system, we saw a per kilowatt construction cost decrease, even though we were building a more complicated machine. So, okay, this is another. We talked about at the beginning. IRP is about balancing. We're looking at cost. We're looking at reliability. We're also looking at the environment. What these three lines are is the dispatch that we get out of strategists when we're doing these portfolio optimizations on the cases that I illustrated the cost for on the previous line. And this helps show, one of the many reasons why we think Palo Verde 3 is a preferred portfolio option. Just to orient the slides, the three squiggly lines are CO2 emissions in metric tons per year. So the three cases that are on here is what happens if we build the 4 SCR and keep the coal units operating. The red line is what happens if we build that gas replacement portfolio. And then I think it's yellow on your, I don't know what color that is, but yellow on your printout. That's what happens with the Palo Verde 3 portfolio in terms of CO2 emissions per year on dispatch. The other lines that are on here are just some kind of baseline type things to think about. The top line is what PNM's carbon dioxide emissions were in 2005. So one of the reasons that we think that carbon legislation is a regulation that we have to reasonably anticipate is coming is, a speech that the President gave this summer where he talked about a 17% reduction below the 2005 levels. So that's what this lower dashed line is, just 17% below the top dotted line. So if you're thinking about it in terms of that metric, the gas replacement portfolio gets us to where we're tracking that line over time. And then the Palo Verde 3 portfolio gets us to where we're below that line. So we include this concept two ways in the modeling. One there, you'll see on the price curves there's a price for carbon. So when we're dispatching out here in these years where carbon is priced, these emissions cost money and that add into the net present value. But the other is the concept of risk, is that if you're in a situation where you're already meeting the stated goal of the future regulation, it helps you feel like I'm better positioned to address any impact or risk of the future regulation. And then this finally is just a slide where we talk about another qualitative discussion. I answered a question from Lou earlier that PNM's IRP, we're just looking at PNM's ownership and dispatch to meet our loads. But one of the things that comes with the Sept is an environmental benefit that is bigger than the benefit that shows up in the PNM portfolio modeling. And the benefits are that when you shut down half of San Juan Generating Station, you get a bigger reduction in items that some of them are not pricing. Like I have a cost in the model for operation of the bag houses that are at San Juan, but I'm not modeling any price for particulate matter emissions. But when you shut down 2 units at San Juan, you're going to reduce those emissions by half. So that was just another illustration of things that we try to look at qualitatively when we're deciding that, hey, based on all the numbers I crunched, this looks like a good way to go. But then when you think about what's the benefit above and beyond what's happening on the PNM system, it's a situation where the environmental improvement is even better than the metrics that I'm including in my model. So the good news for me is that gets to the end of the presentation. So what I want to do is you've heard a lot today. We've covered a lot of ground. we're going to meet again on Friday. So the concept now is just don't leave here with any burning questions. Make sure you ask them. And then if there are items that, what we're going to talk about Friday is we're going to spend more time on things that I know are important. Like we'll talk about the price curves, how they were developed, and how they work with each other. Dean will give a presentation on this risk analysis, what the distribution of each of those curves is that we're using right now. Dean will talk about the energy efficiency resource and how we've got a change in the state law on that, and we'll talk about how we're modeling that in the process. So if there's items in addition to those that you want to hear, let me know. If to the extent I can pull something together by Friday, we'll include it. If not, we'll definitely get to it at some point in the process. So with that wind up, I'll start with questions, Dave.
I'd like to talk about wind. SPS filed a request to buy 700 megawatts of wind at 2.3 cents per kilowatt hour levelized. I think it's case 233, but I'm not sure. And their justification was not a renewable energy case, it was the cost reduction. And basically what they're doing is comparing that 2.3 cents to the cost of natural gas fuel. If I remember right, they realized a $600 million net present value savings as a result of that proposal. I think what you have in your alternatives or your assumptions is a cost of 4.5 cents per wind, which is what came from your RFP process this last year after Red Mesa. But I think if you put in 2.3 cents or even 3 cents into wind, you would find that you have a different outcome. You probably have about the same amount of gas capacity.
Hey, hold on a second, Dave. I'm getting hand signals. The folks in the back of the room can't hear you. Oh, okay. I'm going to give you this. So the folks in the back.
Do I need to start over again?
Unfortunately, yes.
I'll just look at people. I believe it was on July 10th, SPS filed a case to the PRC, I believe it was case 233, that they requested to buy 700 megawatts of wind at 2.3 cents per kilowatt hour levelized. And their justification was not a renewal case, it was a cost reduction program against the cost of natural gas fuel. The net savings to SPS in this case was $600 million on net present value. The assumption that's in the scenarios that we've looked at, I believe, is 4.5 cents per kilowatt hour, which is the quotes that B&M received earlier in the year after the Red Mesa resource, because it was at, I think, 3.2. So my question or my point is, if you put in wind cost assumption at 2.3 cents or even 3 cents, what you would see is that it would knock out some of this natural gas energy produced. It probably wouldn't change the capacity much because you don't get any capacity credit for wind. But I think you would see, one, lower cost for the alternative that you refer to as gas capacity. And two, you would have less risk in the COT chart that you just showed.
Okay, did everybody hear that? First of all, we can run different prices on future resources, so we can model wind at a lower cost. First point on that is we've never, other than the resources we have purchased, we have not seen on bids into our RFP anything close to what Dave's describing. I think part of the reason why SPS can get those prices and we can't is if you compare where the wind resource is to their system. So there's also transmission costs associated with wind for us that isn't there for SPS. But anyway, we could model it at that price and see what happened. And right now all I can do is say we'll see what happens. I think I'd be kind of surprised if we see the kind of changes in the portfolio that Dave's describing, but don't know unless we run. Sorry, I can't see your name on your tag. David Robbins.
I have a question on the second to last slide on the existing system information regarding water use.
Okay, the question is directing us to the water use intensity slide, which is in the existing, yes, the second to last slide, slide 17.
So I'm looking at these numbers here, and they're presented in gallons per megawatt hour. The high point is 1,000 gallons per megawatt hour, which would be 1 gallon per kilowatt hour, which is I'm more used to. In the past, well, first my comment is that these numbers seem very low. In the past, I've been told by P&M that the average water intensity for power generation for all power produced is about 3/4 of a gallon per kilowatt hour. And it depends on how these are rated here, but in this chart here, I understand we're really looking at about 1/3 of a gallon per kilowatt hour. So the numbers here in this chart seem a lot lower than what I have seen on literature research on the internet came up with numbers around 3/4 of a gallon per kilowatt hour. And so overall, these numbers seem very low. The other question I have is the power-variety number seems particularly low. Because it's the same thermal cycle of generation that uses cooling towers and so on. So I don't understand why power-variety would be so much lower than 400.
Okay, again, the question is about the water intensities that are shown on slide 17 of the existing system conditions. We can go back and verify that the numbers on that slide, I don't know what numbers you're comparing to, but we can double check this slide. And then to take the Palo Verde question, one of the unique features about Palo Verde is it uses very little fresh water because since its inception, Palo Verde has had a deal with I believe it's the city of Phoenix, that it uses reclaimed water from the wastewater treatment system. So this shows freshwater use where Palo Verde, we are more or less recycling water out of the wastewater treatment plant. Yeah, it's supposed to be a weighted average of the system, and when we do the weighted average, most of the megawatt hours, again, are going to come from Palo Verde, Four Corners, San Juan. So when I look at that mixture, the 366 compared to these individual bars looks reasonable to me. Okay, I got two questions about Palo Verde. One is about fuel price volatility with nuclear, and the other is about who's currently using the capacity from Palo Verde Unit 3. First, to answer the question, yes, there is variability in uranium pricing, but that doesn't show up as variability in the cost to generate electricity from a nuclear plant because the cost of fuel for a nuclear plant is so small compared to the cost to own and operate that plant. So, yeah, there is fuel variability for uranium, but it's not something that as a buyer of power from a Palo Verde that shows up much in the numbers. And the other question is who's using it now. What's going on right now is P&M sells the generation from Palo Verde on the electric market. So that's the long version of I don't know. Yes, Laura, we had a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to part of the about the water use. Just a friendly suggestion to make it clear about fresh water, maybe the annotation that we're talking about. With regard to Palo Verde, having that percentage water use, I think that's important. Just context. I have a reaction about low numbers here, our numbers, and so make sure that we're going to really important context and comparing.
I think Laura pointed out that we should add that the graph on slide 17 is freshwater usage. So in addition to reconfirming all the numbers, I will make sure we have that labeled properly. And I think in past IRP, we had 2 bars for Palo Verde. We had total water and fresh water, but that we're not showing that on this graph. Tom?
Yeah, and you instructed us not to use
Caveat is we've got 50 minutes, so I'm confused.
Just back to your answer about the follow-up. I'm a little confused about whether the rules and regulations are applied to the model run, which one. I guess the easiest, the best way to ask the question is, are we going to be able to tell in future runs and results which renewable resources are being selected by the model to satisfy the RFS constraint, and whether there are any renewables that are in that?
Question is, show the line of distinction between which renewables are in there for RPS reasons or not. The way we've constructed the portfolios up to now, that distinction doesn't really exist. What we've done up to now is give the model our assumptions on resource, cost, and capability, let it pick what's economically the best choice. So we haven't taken that step yet of looking, okay, then what renewable resources would we need in addition to that to comply with the renewable portfolio standard. So that's a step that, and I believe will follow a similar process as you go through, and first choice is if it's economically taken, and then you look at, I've got reliability things I need to worry about that might not be being captured in strategist. I've got rules and regulations I've got to meet, like renewable portfolio standard. So then you adjust portfolios based on those type of constraints that aren't easily modeled in strategist. So we haven't taken that step yet. My promise going forward in IRP is that we will, when we finalize, document the report, the most cost-effective portfolio will comply with the renewable portfolio standard.
Is there a financial penalty for not meeting the federal step? And if so, is that included in the cost?
The question is a financial penalty for not meeting the federal SIP. There's a penalty to not complying with the regional age rule. Right? So that, we're talking about 2 potential ways to comply. Right now, the federal implementation plan going forward, we hope it becomes what the revised SIP is. In either case, if we're not complying with the regional age rule, then yeah, there's Clean Air Act ramifications associated with that. We don't model that because we're assuming in both cases we're complying.
Even though in that chart that shows that we're not in certain situations.
Okay, that chart on, if you want to back up, Ryan, to the emissions graph. That one. These lines don't represent current obligations.
Okay, they're proposed.
I wouldn't even say they're proposed. They're something that was in a speech by the president this summer 17% reduction over 2002 is a greenhouse gas rule target that's existed for a long time. So despite the fact the most recent iteration of it was a speech this summer, it isn't a new concept. But in terms of our modeling, if you go back to the PACE price curves, you'll see that there's a price for CO2 emissions as time goes on, and that price goes up as time goes on. So when we're talking PACE reference case pricing, then these emissions are assigned a price penalty to assume that in the future, emitting CO2 will incur a cost.
So it has nothing to do with penalties.
Now, James?
Yeah, I had a question on slide 8 of the existing system. The last column, each contribution capacity, can you explain that and their relationships as capacity factors? I guess you're going to provide all the capacity factors next time.
Yeah, we need to supply capacity factors. Slide 8, peak contribution capacity, that shows what we're including in the modeling for these resources. For the first two buckets, which are the solar that's online and the solar that's under construction, those are both fixed tilt systems. So if you do the math, you should see that the difference between nameplate and peak is about 55%. So what we're saying is that hour ending 4, the panel's generating 55% of what it could be generating if it was getting perfect sunshine.
But is that equal to your capacity factor?
No, the capacity factor is a different concept. It's how, if I've got 1 megawatt solar facility, in theory, if the sun shone 24/7, 365, it would generate 8,760 megawatt hours for the year. But because the sun does set, we'll get more like 27% of that number. So that 27% would be the capacity factor for that resource.
Well, this column is basically the most you can get when you need it the most.
Yeah, it's what we expect this resource to give me when I have peak demand. Dave?
How have you traded cost for the 79 megawatts of coal?
Question is about cost for 79 megawatts of coal from Unit 4. We own capacity in Units 3 and Units 2. So what we're anticipating, and this isn't final yet, but we'll be swapping capacity between Unit 3 and Unit 4. So if there is a cost, it would just be differential in, I mean, you got me stumped here because there's an accounting thing.
It doesn't change the cost of getting energy from San Juan.
What we're assuming is the cost to operate the Unit 4 capacity, whether it's the 78 megawatts or what we already own, is the same.
Right. And your input values would be the same.
In this modeling, that's true. Because we're swapping capacity we already own from one unit to another. You're in.
What is the capital cost for SNCR and associated facilities?
The question is, what's the capital cost for SNCR and associated facilities? That's another one where I don't want to rely on my memory, especially now after I've been talking for a while. Do you know that off the top of your head, Dean? I mean, that's something that's easy to supply and we'll include it by Friday. I mean, the takeaway is, based on what you saw, it's a lot less than the cost of SCR. not seeing any more questions, so just to wrap it up, today I think what we accomplished was just an overview of soup to nuts, the kind of things we'll be looking at in IRP. We tried to illustrate that overview by looking at two scenarios that are important, especially for this IRP. What we're going to do next is spend some time, some more quality time on a few elements of that process that are also important. So we'll be talking about risk distributions, we'll be talking about price curves, we'll be talking about the energy efficiency resource. And so, first of all, personally, I appreciate you being here and the thoughtfulness and attention to the topic and the questions we received. I really think today was, at least from TNM's perspective, a good meeting. I hope it was valuable time spent for you. The next meeting, Friday, will be similar to the way we set it up here. You know, doors are open really at 6 a.m. if you want to get here that soon, but you might be sitting in the lobby. By around, between 7:30 and 8:30, we'll be shuttling people up to the room. At 8:30, we will start broadcasting through the webcast, so that should give you plenty of time to get here, get through security, get settled, that type of thing. And then we will follow that up with a wrap-up session the next week. And then we have another meeting scheduled where I'm going to take the sum of these 3 days, just the overview of everything that we saw and heard, and we'll be presenting in Santa Fe on October 4th. We'll be at the PRC building, so that's something I'll get a few more details out about that in case you, those of you who've been here, you've lived it, so you're welcome to join us in Santa Fe too, but that one will be more of just kind of a summary of what we're doing here. When we get to the end of the day, next Thursday, we'll be talking about how we'll roll out the rest of these meetings. Because one of the things we're going to talk about Thursday is this IRP is not only about San Juan Generating Station. There are other things that we need to explore and study. So we'll be giving you our plan for looking at those things and try to work out a good system of how and when to meet on those items. The goal today was try to handle stuff in the discussion at kind of a higher level than maybe we've done in the past, and supported that by handing out material on the data. I know you didn't have time before this meeting to look at that stuff, so hopefully you do look at it and then we can keep the meetings at the level we've been at, because like I say, from my perspective, it's been very productive, and I thank you all for coming. I've got Steve, question in the back.
So, but when you anticipate you'll have a draft on your
Schedule-wise, I think the soonest we can have a draft on that will be in the February time frame. There's still a lot to do. On the other hand, what we've shown you today, I think will show up in the report that we write by the time we get there. So we're trying to document as we go. Putting it all together on a piece of paper will happen.
And when's the filing date?
Filing date's June.
Will all the handouts be posted?
Yes. Handouts will be posted to the website. I've had a few difficulties there. Part of it was getting the material pulled together, and then the other was just getting I'm not in control of posting anything to TNM.com, so I apologize if the stuff's not up there yet, but we will get it there. So again, I appreciate everyone coming. I realize 3 days, and should we go? Did you have a question, Mark? Oh, good. Administrative topic. If you drop off your name tents on your way out, you'll have them again when you show up at future meetings. So, or you can leave them at the table or drop them off. Either way works.
Thank you for allowing me to ask a couple of questions.
Yeah.